Hello. This is the end of the round board state for the Axis and Allies 1942 starting date for global. Now, let's start the Pacific side. Japan, the last turn, they decided to do kamikaze attack on the fleet because they knew they weren't going to make it. They were trying to send forces to stop the Russians from reviving China, but they would just keep pumping out units. And then they were going to blitzkrieg through there and take some IPCs for them. But the main issue was Calcutta. There's way too many guys there. I think there's like 5 red ships. There's way too many guys that, or there's way too many cannon fodder there for them to pump through. And Zach just actually started building a navy now because they had to protect their homelands because there was way too many Japanese transports everywhere. There wasn't a ginormous American fleet, but then, like I said, the Japanese had a kamikaze attack. That's the navy they purchased, they placed on their last turn. It just wasn't looking good for them, and Allies were eventually going to take Tokyo and all the victory cities down here. Again, they weren't able to keep up producing 6 tanks a turn down here for each of the 3 tanks down here, 3 tanks up there, each turn. If they were able to do that, they'd definitely be able to take Calcutta eventually. On the Europe side, this is what's going on. Americans are just building up. They were going to send extra forces, but the game ended. The Allies has had too much overwhelming pressure. The Axis could see the inevitable coming. They landed into Africa to take out the last few Axis units down there. A combined 3-country force in Africa about to take the last Italian guy protecting German Tunisia. If you're curious, at the start of the game, it's actually Italian. But because there was back and forth battles, the Germans are actually the ones to recapture it, so they took it as their own. France, yeah, there's a lot of stuff in there. France did get I think like 2 or 3 rounds of purchasing to purchase some extra units. You know when France start purchasing units, it's over because they're putting units right in front of you. They have a few tanks, an artillery, and some guys. They're making some offensive pushes in southern France, skirmishing with the Italians back and forth. The Germans they were trying to hold up. They just built a big wall. But the Allies just kept coming, and they weren't going to be able to hold. Although on the the eastern front, my bad. It may look like they were doing bad, but again, this is the 1942 starting date, and Germany will probably be punched back a lot. And Germany's focused on the defensive in this starting date rather than the offensive. Now, the Russians are not in a bad position, but for the 1942 starting date, they should definitely be pushing back a lot more than they are. That's probably because they had to focus on Japan and send some troops to take care of them. But yes, the Eastern Front would eventually crumble for the Germans, but they were holding off really good because they start this whole section through here. They have it. But, obviously the Russians push back, first turn, take it all, except, 2 territories. But, the Germans did hold Leningrad for a couple turns, back and forth purchasing stuff up there, try to hold on to it as long as possible. Then there was too many guys, they couldn't handle them. The UK is the big star. For 4 transports, they were loading 12 units under their transports each turn. For a lot of the turns, it was 4 tanks 4 guys each turn, and that's nasty. You don't want to have to deal with that as the Axis. But what's shocking is the Italian homeland actually held on great. They were holding on to the Southern fronts for a while and nitpicking at them. I don't know if I have more guys. I went out of like chips, so I just put a bunch of green chips there to represent it. But they have a lot of guys there. And their navy is still alive. They have a 1 battleship left. Yes, they were kicked out of Africa. But Italy, the games I played, usually does a lot worse. And they held on to Crealia. Can't pronounce it. Crealia, whatever that one is. Forgive me for my pronunciation. And they held on to the Navy. They don't usually get to hold on to a Navy because the Allied Air Force just bombs it up. Or the American, if they decide to, brings their fleet down here to get rid of it. And then there was a German fleet up here that was resting there basically the whole game. And was just keeping London at check, making sure they didn't leave any spots open for an amphibious assault from the Germans. But eventually got taken out, and the Allies retreated that sea zone. And there's a lot more boats there, but there's only a couple more boats there left in the Med. And even if the Germans wanted to try to take it out, it would just be a waste of their planes. They really need them for the defense, especially those fighters. But the game's over now, so it doesn't really matter. With the Allies, they did pretty good. This game does favor the Allies. And about Calcutta, too, they're usually only probably producing 2 guys or 3 guys a turn towards the early, middle of the game. And Japan can definitely overpower that with IPCs. But the issue is that forces from Cairo a couple turns ago were just forming a huge supply line through here of, I think it was mechs, tanks, and planes. It just kept coming. There was a steady stream of guys that's coming to Calcutta. And yes, Japan could have out-IPC'd them, but they're probably doing it by 1 or 2 a turn, and that doesn't even count for 1 guy. But there's just too much in there. And even that tank and the 2 mechs, they didn't purchase that. That was some of the stuff that came from Egypt. Simmerfold, those extra planes too. And that Anzac guy was trying to make the long way from Cairo to there. But he had to make some pit stops because the Germans landed in Syria early game. And also, what didn't help is that transports, this factory down here, the British were purchasing the transport into infantry a turn a couple of times and just sailing it up here and then sailing it back down and going back and forth. And that's 2 extra guys that are getting in Calcutta each turn or every other turn. And in this turn, they try to get some offensive units up there because Japan is having to sweat out into China again because the Russians, but that doesn't matter now because the game's over. The Anzac were gonna try to island hop and do that. They did have more islands, but the Japan did a counteroffensive on them. But eventually the Anzac probably would take all of the islands because the British wouldn't have time, maybe. Or maybe they would have because there's no fleet anymore. But they were trying to island hop, retake the islands. They have a few subs. They didn't really... Anzac did nothing the whole entire game besides. They had to really defend their homeland because Japan had like a big stack of transports and boats there that could easily reach there. If you're ever curious on how to properly defend your homeland, I personally recommend having guys there, 1 guy there and 1 guy there, or more guys if you have a lot of guys. I like 1 guy there, 1 guy there. Tempt the Japanese to come. You'd have a buttload of artillery there and a buttload there. So say a guy there, 4 infantry and artillery, 4 infantry and artillery, and over here you could have maybe, I don't know, and have your planes there too. Because then if they take these 2 spots, you have those 2 artillery for offensive power to regain it. Or you can even have more artillery if you have that money. But really, make sure you keep these two territories in check, because these are the two territories where you were strike back to reclaim the territories. Because this one actually touches both. This is important. And obviously, Clinton is very important because its IPC value, it's more than the other ones, except that one, and New Zealand. But it has the air bases. It's just an important spot. You gotta keep that. That's your capital. New Zealand don't care about it. If they try to go after it, the Americans will just come down and pick them off. It gets them way out of range. They want to take it, let them. That's the game. You can see there was another mech that was about to go into Calcutta 2 from Egypt next turn. But that's the game board, and if you're curious, one last thing, if you're curious why there is no German units there, it's because Germany, beginning of the round, had better defenses up here, but then the Russians got good walls and kind of knocked them. But they didn't really need units over here because they were holding on, and this is the end of the turn. So, and they're probably going to retreat their units back. Well, I think this is mid-game because France hasn't went this turn yet. I think it was done with Japan's turn, and then the Allies won. Yeah. It just wasn't looking good for the Axis. And then, I keep ranting on, but I think one last thing. The Germans did try to purchase a complex in Greece. The only issue with that is they didn't get to barely put anything there the entire game because the Russians up there, they couldn't really focus down there. Because then they had a transport and stuff, and they were sending, I think the max troops they had in Tobruk or something was 4 guys, a mech and a tank, and then that got wiped out by the British because they got the factory down here and they just purchased mechs and tanks and rolled them up their city. Consistent line. And then the Germans, well, Ireland, that's not an island, they were trying to take Syria and step into the Middle East a little bit, which didn't go bad for them, but didn't go good for them. But this is the end of the round. Board state. Alrighty. Peace out and goodbye.